We're thankful for your continued viewership. Before we begin, tell us, where in the world are you watching from? We love knowing our global reach. Now, let's dive into today's story. Chapter 1. The Foundation. Boyd Hutchinson had built his life like a fortress, methodically, quietly, and with walls so thick that few ever glimpsed what lay beneath. At 42, he owned a modest construction company in Cedar Falls, a mid-sized town where everyone knew everyone, but nobody really knew Boyd. His employees respected him for his fairness and feared him for his intensity. When Boyd made a decision, it was final. When someone crossed him, they learned quickly never to do it again. The Hutchinson name carried weight in Cedar Falls, though not the kind people whispered about at dinner parties. Boyd's grandfather had been the town's most feared loan shark during the Depression. His father had run the docks until his death, controlling every shipment that came through the port. Boyd had chosen a more legitimate path, but the family's network of connections, some legal, others existing in the gray areas, remained intact and loyal. He'd met Lindsay Walsh 12 years ago at a charity auction. She was 25 then, a kindergarten teacher with honey-colored hair and a smile that could disarm anyone. Boyd, normally suspicious of everyone, found himself genuinely captivated. Lindsay seemed different from the women who usually pursued him for his money or connections. She appeared innocent, caring, untouched by the cynicism that permeated his world. Their courtship was a study in contrasts. Boyd, calculating and reserved, found himself opening up to Lindsay's warmth. She laughed at his dry humor, encouraged his rare moments of vulnerability, and seemed genuinely interested in building a life together. After 2 years of dating, he proposed with his grandmother's ring, a decision he'd later realize was his first mistake. The early years of marriage were good. Lindsay quit teaching after their wedding, claiming she wanted to focus on their home. Boyd supported this decision, even when she showed little interest in having children. He assumed she was waiting for the right time. He bought her a beautiful house on Maple Street, gave her access to his accounts, and trusted her completely. But Boyd failed to recognize the signs that should have been obvious to someone of his experience. Lindsay's interest in their life together began to wane around year 5. She started taking longer shopping trips, joined a book club that met at odd hours, and developed an enthusiasm for yoga classes that seemed to require increasingly revealing outfits. Boyd's business associates, men who'd learned to read people as a matter of survival, began dropping subtle hints. Mickey Torino, who ran the waste management contract for the county, mentioned seeing Lindsay at restaurants when Boyd was supposedly out of town. Frank DeLuca, whose family controlled most of the legitimate gambling in the region, casually noted that Lindsay seemed to have made new friends at the casino. But Boyd dismissed their concerns. He'd built his life on the principle that loyalty, once earned, was absolute. Lindsay had chosen him, married him, shared his bed for over a decade. In his mind, that created an unbreakable bond. He was about to learn how naive that assumption was. The truth began to unravel on a Tuesday in March. Boyd had returned early from a business trip to Pittsburgh, where he'd been finalizing a contract for a new shopping complex. He'd caught an earlier flight, planning to surprise Lindsay with dinner at Rossini's, the Italian place where they'd had their first date. But Lindsay wasn't home. Her car was gone, and the house had the peculiar emptiness that suggested she'd been away for hours. Boyd called her cell phone and was told she was at book club. When he drove past the library, her car wasn't there. A check of the yoga studio yielded the same result. That's when Boyd did what he should have done years earlier. He began to investigate. Using contacts who owed him favors, he discovered that Lindsay had been seen regularly at the Grandview Hotel with Travis Kellerman, a real estate developer who'd moved to Cedar Falls 6 months ago. Kellerman was everything Boyd wasn't: flashy, charming, and reckless. He drove a red Corvette, wore expensive suits, and had a reputation for pursuing married women. He'd made a fortune flipping properties in California before some unspecified trouble forced him to relocate. Now he was trying to establish himself in Cedar Falls' real estate market. The investigation revealed that Lindsay and Travis had been meeting for 3 months. They were careful, but not careful enough. Hotel receipts, credit card records, and witness statements painted a clear picture of a full-blown affair. But Boyd discovered something else that cut even deeper. Lindsay had been feeding Travis inside information about Boyd's business dealings, including details about upcoming municipal contracts and zoning changes. Boyd spent that night in his study, staring at the evidence spread across his desk. The photos of Lindsay entering and leaving the hotel. The bank records showing cash withdrawals that corresponded to their meetings. The recorded conversations his contact at the phone company had provided. By dawn, Boyd Hutchinson had made a decision that would change everything. He wouldn't confront Lindsay directly. He wouldn't demand explanations or seek marriage counseling. Instead, he would do what his father and grandfather had taught him. He would plan, he would wait, and when the time was right, he would strike with such force that his enemies would never recover. The man who'd built his life on loyalty was about to show his wife and her lover what happened when that loyalty was betrayed. Chapter 2. The Discovery. For the next 2 weeks, Boyd Hutchinson became a ghost in his own life. He maintained his routine, leaving for work at 7, returning by 6, sharing dinner with Lindsay while she chatted about her book club or yoga class. But underneath his calm exterior, Boyd was conducting the most thorough investigation of his life. He'd learned patience from his father, who used to say, "A man who acts in anger acts like a fool. A man who acts with cold planning acts like God." Boyd was determined to be the latter. Using a network of contacts that stretched back 3 generations, Boyd began assembling a complete picture of his wife's betrayal. Tony Marcelli, who ran a private investigation firm that existed primarily to serve the Hutchinson family's interests, provided surveillance footage. Detective Ray Kowalski, who owed Boyd several significant favors, offered access to phone records and credit reports. Even Father McKenna at St. Catherine's, where Boyd's family had attended for decades, quietly shared information about the spiritual counseling Lindsay had sought, counseling that had mysteriously coincided with her affair. The scope of Lindsay's deception was breathtaking. She'd been using a secondary credit card, one Boyd didn't know existed, to fund her activities with Travis. She'd established a private email account and was communicating with her lover through an encrypted messaging app. Most damaging of all, she'd been photographing documents from Boyd's home office, sharing strategic business information that could be worth millions in the right hands. Travis Kellerman, meanwhile, was proving to be exactly the kind of predator Boyd had expected. The man had a pattern of targeting wealthy, married women in every city where he'd operated. His real estate development was largely a front for more elaborate cons. He would romance married women, extract financial and business information, then use that intelligence to manipulate property deals and municipal contracts. But Travis had made a critical error in choosing Lindsay Hutchinson as his mark. He'd assumed Boyd was just another successful small-town businessman, comfortable, complacent, and ultimately harmless. Travis had no idea that Boyd's construction company was merely the legitimate face of a family that had been moving money, favors, and influence through Cedar Falls for 3 generations. Boyd's grandfather, Salvatore Hutchinson, had come to America in 1920 with nothing but ambition and a willingness to do whatever was necessary to survive. By 1930, he controlled the flow of liquor, gambling, and loans throughout the county. When Prohibition ended, Salvatore transitioned into legitimate businesses while maintaining the network of relationships that had made him powerful. Boyd's father, Michael, had inherited both the businesses and the connections. He'd expanded the family's influence into construction, waste management, and municipal contracts while carefully avoiding the kinds of activities that attracted federal attention. By the time Boyd took over, the Hutchinson name was synonymous with success, reliability, and, for those who knew the family's history, consequences for those who crossed them. Now, as Boyd compiled evidence of his wife's betrayal, he began to formulate a plan that would destroy both Lindsay and Travis while protecting his own interests. But first, he needed to understand exactly what they were planning. The breakthrough came on a Friday evening when Lindsay announced she was attending a weekend women's retreat at a spa in the mountains. Boyd's surveillance team followed her instead to the Grandview Hotel, where she met Travis for what appeared to be an extended planning session. Hidden cameras in Travis's room, installed by professionals who owed the Hutchinson family considerable favors, captured hours of conversation. What Boyd heard that night changed everything. Lindsay and Travis weren't just having an affair. They were planning to destroy Boyd's life systematically. Travis had convinced Lindsay that Boyd was hiding significant assets and that she deserved far more than she was getting. Their plan was to file for divorce while simultaneously accusing Boyd of domestic abuse, business fraud, and tax evasion. Lindsay would claim she discovered Boyd's criminal activities and was cooperating with federal investigators. Travis had connections with a corrupt FBI agent who would provide apparent legitimacy to their claims. They would freeze Boyd's assets, destroy his reputation, and ultimately force him to settle for a fraction of his actual worth. Lindsay would emerge as a sympathetic victim. Travis would use the chaos to manipulate several pending real estate deals, and Boyd would be left ruined. But the most chilling part of their conversation was Lindsay's casual cruelty. She laughed about Boyd's obvious devotion to her, calling him pathetically loyal and completely clueless. She described intimate moments from their marriage in mocking terms, reducing 12 years of what Boyd had thought was genuine love to a series of calculated performances. "He actually thinks I've been faithful all these years," Lindsay said, her laughter sharp and cold. "The poor bastard has no idea how many men I've been with. Boyd's just been convenient, stable income, nice house, and dumb enough to trust me completely." Travis's response was equally revealing. Men like Boyd think they're smart because they've got money and connections, but they're emotional children. Once we spring this trap, he'll be so focused on defending himself that he won't see the real damage until it's too late. By the time the dust settles, he'll be broken, and we'll own this town. Boyd listened to the entire conversation 3 times, memorizing every word, every inflection, every casual moment of betrayal. By Monday morning, he'd made his decision. Lindsay and Travis wanted to play a game of destruction. He would show them what real destruction looked like. But Boyd's plan wouldn't be reactive or defensive. He wouldn't simply expose their scheme and move on. Instead, he would create a trap so elaborate and devastating that neither Lindsay nor Travis would ever recover. And he would use their own arrogance and greed against them. The first phase would begin with Boyd appearing to be exactly what Lindsay and Travis believed him to be, a trusting husband who had no idea what was coming. But by the time they realized their mistake, it would be far too late. Boyd Hutchinson was about to show them why his family had survived and thrived for 3 generations while others had fallen. The lesson would be permanent, public, and absolutely merciless. Chapter 3. The Trap Springs. The plan Lindsay and Travis had so carefully crafted began to unfold on a humid Thursday evening in June. Boyd had known exactly when it would happen. His surveillance network had intercepted the final planning session 3 days earlier. He was ready. Boyd arrived home from work at his usual time to find Lindsay in the kitchen, chopping vegetables with unusual vigor. Her movements were sharp, aggressive, and her eyes held a gleam he'd never seen before. She was wearing a dress that was slightly too formal for a quiet evening at home, and her makeup was more elaborate than necessary. She was dressed for a performance. "How was your day?" Lindsay asked, her voice carrying a false sweetness that made Boyd's skin crawl. "Same as always," Boyd replied, loosening his tie. "Wilson's project is running behind schedule, but we'll manage." "How was your day?" "Oh, busy. I had lunch with Rachel, then stopped by the bank to update our account information." Lindsay's smile was predatory. "I've been thinking we should review our finances. Make sure everything is properly organized." Boyd nodded, understanding that this was the opening move. Lindsay was establishing her awareness of their financial situation for the record. "That sounds sensible. We can look at everything this weekend." "Actually," Lindsay said, setting down her knife, "I've already started. I hope you don't mind, but I found some documents in your office that concern me." "Here it comes," Boyd thought. Out loud, he said, "What kind of documents?" Lindsay's expression shifted to one of pained concern. "Boyd, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be honest with me. Are you involved in anything illegal?" Boyd felt a surge of admiration for her acting ability. If he hadn't known better, he might have believed her concern was genuine. "What are you talking about?" "I found records of cash payments," Meetings with people who have criminal backgrounds and contracts that don't seem legitimate. Lindsay's voice trembled slightly. I'm scared, Boyd. I'm scared for us. This was the moment Boyd had been preparing for. He let his expression shift to one of surprise, then hurt, then anger. You went through my private files? I had to, Lindsay said, tears beginning to form in her eyes. When I saw the bank statements showing all those cash withdrawals, I needed to understand what was happening. Boyd took a step toward her, and Lindsay immediately took 2 steps back, her hand moving to her purse where Boyd knew she had a small digital recorder running. Every word of this conversation would be used as evidence in court. Lindsay, those are legitimate business transactions. If you had questions, you should have asked me directly instead of sneaking around. I try to ask you, but you always change the subject when I bring up money. Lindsay's voice was getting louder, more emotional. Boyd, I think you're involved with organized crime. I think our entire life has been built on illegal money. Boyd let his anger show, stepping closer again. This time, Lindsay pressed herself against the kitchen counter, her eyes wide with apparent fear. That's insane, Boyd said, his voice rising. My family has been in legitimate business for decades. Just because we know people from different backgrounds doesn't mean... Different backgrounds? Lindsay's laugh was shrill. Boyd, these men are criminals. Mickey Torino, Frank DeLuca, Tony Marcelli, I've looked them all up. They're connected to organized crime, and you're meeting with them regularly. Boyd was impressed. Lindsay had done her homework, identifying several of his legitimate business associates and characterizing them as criminal connections. To someone unfamiliar with the complexities of small-town business relationships, her accusations might seem credible. Those men are business associates, Boyd said. Mickey handles waste management for my construction sites. Frank owns several legitimate businesses. Tony runs a security firm. You're seeing conspiracies where none exist. Then explain the cash payments, Lindsay demanded. Explain why you have records of meetings that aren't on your official calendar. Explain why you have documentation about municipal contracts months before they're publicly announced. Boyd realized that Lindsay and Travis had been far more thorough than he'd initially understood. They'd been building this case for months, not weeks. But their thoroughness would ultimately be their downfall. I can explain all of that, Boyd said. But first I want to know why you're really asking these questions. Who put these ideas in your head? Lindsay's expression flickered, just for a moment, and Boyd saw genuine panic in her eyes. Nobody put anything in my head. I'm concerned about my husband and our marriage. Are you? Boyd asked quietly. Or are you looking for reasons to justify something you've already decided to do? Before Lindsay could answer, the doorbell rang. Both of them froze, staring at each other across the kitchen. Boyd could see the calculation in Lindsay's eyes. This wasn't part of her plan, but it was part of Boyd's. The bell rang again, followed by heavy knocking. Boyd walked to the front door, knowing exactly who he would find. Through the window, he could see 3 Cedar Falls police officers standing on his porch. Boyd opened the door with the expression of a confused, innocent man. Officers, what can I do for you? Detective Ray Kowalski stepped forward, his face professionally neutral. Boyd had known Ray for 15 years, and they'd worked together on several municipal projects. But tonight, Ray was strictly business. Mr. Hutchinson, we've received a complaint of domestic violence. We need to speak with you and your wife. Boyd heard Lindsay gasp behind him, a perfect performance of shock and fear. Officers, please come in. I don't understand what this is about. The 3 policemen enter the house, and Boyd noticed that Lindsay had positioned herself near the staircase, as if preparing to flee. Her eyes were wide, her breathing rapid, and her hands were shaking slightly. To the officers, she looked like a terrified victim. Ma'am, Kowalski said gently, we received a call about a domestic disturbance. Are you Mrs. Hutchinson? Yes, Lindsay whispered, her voice barely audible. I don't know what to say. Mrs. Hutchinson, are you in immediate danger? The second officer, a young man Boyd didn't recognize, had his hand resting on his radio. Lindsay looked at Boyd, then at the officers, then seemed to make a decision. Yes, she said, her voice stronger. I think I am. My husband has been threatening me, and I've discovered that he's involved in criminal activities. Boyd felt a moment of pure admiration for Lindsay's performance. She was selling this perfectly, the reluctant victim finally finding the courage to speak out. Mrs. Hutchinson, Kowalski said, "We're going to need you to be more specific. What kind of threats has your husband made?" "He's been increasingly angry about my questions regarding his business dealings," Lindsay said, tears beginning to flow. "When I confronted him tonight about evidence I've found of illegal activities, he became violent. He grabbed me and threatened to hurt me if I talked to anyone about what I've discovered." All three officers turned to look at Boyd, who maintained his expression of confused innocence. "Officers, my wife is obviously upset about something, but I haven't threatened or touched her. We were having a discussion about some business documents she found, but there was no violence." "Sir," the young officer said, "we're going to need you to step outside while we speak with your wife privately." Boyd nodded cooperatively. "Of course. I want to help resolve this misunderstanding." As Boyd stepped onto the porch, he could hear Lindsay's voice through the open door, gaining strength and confidence as she told her story. She was accusing him of threatening her, of being involved with criminals, of using their marriage to hide illegal activities. She was painting herself as a victim who had finally found the courage to seek help. But what Lindsay didn't know was that Detective Kowalski was carrying a special recording device, one that had been provided by Boyd's people 3 days earlier. Every word of Lindsay's accusations was being captured in perfect digital clarity. After 20 minutes, Kowalski emerged from the house. "Mr. Hutchinson, based on your wife's statement, we're going to have to place you under arrest for domestic violence and intimidation of a witness." Boyd allowed himself to look shocked, hurt, and betrayed. "Ray, you've known me for 15 years. You know I would never hurt Lindsay." "I'm sorry, Boyd," Kowalski said quietly as he produced handcuffs. "I have to follow procedure." As the cuffs clicked around Boyd's wrists, he could see Lindsay watching from the window. Her expression was one of satisfaction mixed with what might have been genuine relief. She actually believed she had won. Boyd was placed in the back of the police car, and as they drove toward the station, he used his one allowed phone call to dial a number he had memorized but never expected to use. Mayor William Garrett answered on the second ring. "This is Bill." "Mr. Mayor, this is Boyd Hutchinson. I need a call on some very old debts." There was a pause. "What's the situation?" "My wife just had me arrested on false charges. She's working with Travis Kellerman to destroy me, and they've involved federal authorities. I need immediate intervention." "How immediate?" "I need to be out of custody within the hour, and I need the charges to disappear completely. More importantly, I need everyone to understand that I'm not the man they thought I was." Another pause. "Boyd, if I do this, there's no going back. People will know." "Let them know," Boyd said quietly. "It's time to stop pretending." 30 minutes later, Mayor Garrett burst into the Cedar Falls police station with an expression of barely controlled fury. Behind him were District Attorney Patricia Hendricks, Police Chief Robert Santos, and 3 men in expensive suits whom Boyd recognized as federal prosecutors. "Where is Boyd Hutchinson?" Garrett demanded, his voice echoing through the station. Detective Kowalski looked up from his paperwork, clearly startled. "Mr. Mayor, he's in holding. He was arrested on domestic violence charges." "Get those cuffs off now," Garrett shouted, loud enough for everyone in the building to hear. "And someone get his wife down here immediately." As the handcuffs were removed, Garrett turned to Boyd with an expression of profound apology. "I'm sorry this happened. We had no idea they would move this quickly." Boyd rubbed his wrists, noting that every police officer in the building was staring at him with new understanding. "It's not your fault, Bill. I should have acted sooner." When Lindsay arrived at the station 20 minutes later, clearly expecting to file additional charges against her husband, she found herself facing a very different situation. Boyd was standing free, surrounded by the most powerful people in the county, and everyone was looking at her with expressions of barely concealed hostility. "Mrs. Hutchinson," Mayor Garrett said, his voice cold and formal, "you've made a serious mistake tonight." Lindsay looked confused, then frightened, then desperate. "I don't understand. My husband threatened me. He's involved with criminals." "Woman," Garrett said, his voice rising, You just destroyed your life. Who did you think you were playing with? And in that moment, Lindsay Hutchinson realized that she had never really known her husband at all. Chapter 4. The Revelation. The police station had never been quieter. Lindsay stood in the center of the room, surrounded by the most powerful figures in Cedar Falls, all of whom were looking at her as if she were something they'd scraped off their shoes. Boyd watched his wife's face cycle through confusion, fear, and a dawning understanding that her carefully laid plans had just collapsed completely. Mayor Garrett gestured toward his entourage. "Mrs. Hutchinson, I'd like you to meet some people. This is District Attorney Patricia Hendricks, who's been investigating the corruption charges you're about to bring against your husband. This is Police Chief Santos, who's been wondering how you obtained confidential police information for your accusations. And these gentlemen are federal prosecutors who've been very interested in your boyfriend's background." Lindsay's face went pale. "I don't know what you're talking about." "Travis Kellerman," said one of the federal prosecutors, a thin man with gray hair and predatory eyes. Real name, Travis Morrison. Wanted in California for real estate fraud, identity theft, and extortion. Currently under federal surveillance for conspiracy to commit fraud in municipal contracts. Boyd stepped forward, his demeanor completely transformed from the confused husband of an hour ago. "Lindsay, you've been sleeping with a federal fugitive. You've been passing him classified information about municipal projects. And tonight, you try to destroy my life based on his instructions." "Boyd, Lindsay started then stopped. For the first time since Boyd had known her, she seemed genuinely speechless. "The recording device you had in your purse captured everything," District Attorney Hendricks said. "Your accusations against your husband, your admission to accessing confidential documents, and some very interesting details about your relationship with Mr. Morrison." Lindsay's hand instinctively went to her purse. "You can't use that. It's illegal to record someone without their consent." Boyd laughed, a sound completely devoid of humor. "Lindsay, I've been recording every conversation in our house for the past 3 months. I know about every meeting with Travis, every lie you've told me, and every piece of classified information you've stolen. The only question now is whether you're going to cooperate with the federal investigation or whether you're going to prison." Mayor Garrett checked his watch. "Mrs. Hutchinson, we have Travis Morrison in custody at the county jail. He's been very talkative since we arrested him an hour ago. According to his statement, this entire scheme was your idea. You approached him, you provided the information, and you convinced him to help you destroy your husband." "That's not true." Lindsay's voice cracked. "Travis planned everything. He told me Boyd was dangerous, that he was involved with criminals, that I needed to protect myself." "Really?" Boyd pulled out his phone and played a recorded conversation. Lindsay's voice filled the room. "Boyd's just been convenient, stable income, nice house, and dumb enough to trust me completely." Lindsay staggered backward, as if she'd been physically struck. "Where did you get that?" "The Grandview Hotel has been under federal surveillance for 6 months, Police Chief Santos explained. "Every room is monitored. We have recordings of every meeting you had with Morrison, including your discussions about framing your husband for domestic violence and federal crimes." Boyd watched his wife's world crumble in real time. Her face had gone from pale to gray, and her hands were shaking uncontrollably. But he felt no sympathy, only a cold satisfaction that justice was finally being served. "Here's what's going to happen," District Attorney Hendricks said. "You're going to be charged with conspiracy to commit fraud, filing false police reports, and theft of classified documents. The federal prosecutors will determine whether additional charges apply. Your assets will be frozen pending investigation, and you'll be held without bail as a flight risk." "But that's impossible," Lindsay whispered. "Boyd doesn't have access to classified documents. He runs a construction company." Mayor Garrett exchanged a look with Boyd, who nodded slightly. It was time for the full truth. "Mrs. Hutchinson," Garrett said, "your husband doesn't just run a construction company. Boyd's family has been the unofficial power structure in this county for 3 generations. Every major municipal contract, every zoning decision, every significant business deal involves the Hutchinsons. Your husband has been handling classified information on behalf of the county government for over a decade." Boyd stepped closer to Lindsay, close enough that only she could hear his next words. I've been the unofficial mayor of this town since my father died. Every favor, every contact, every piece of influence you thought was criminal activity, it's all completely legal. It's all mine. Lindsay's legs gave out, and she sank into a nearby chair. But you work construction. You come home dirty. You watch football on Sundays. I work construction because I like building things, Boyd said. I come home dirty because I do honest work. And I watch football because it relaxes me after spending my weeks managing the economic future of this county. You married the most powerful man in Cedar Falls, and you never even realized it. When the federal prosecutors stepped forward, Mrs. Hutchinson, your boyfriend has been trying to infiltrate municipal corruption networks throughout the state. He chose Cedar Falls because he thought it would be an easy target, a small town with small-time players. What he didn't realize is that Cedar Falls has been clean for 20 years specifically because the Hutchinsons have been rooting out corruption. Boyd's smile was razor-sharp. Travis thought he was playing me, but he was actually helping me identify and eliminate the last pockets of corruption in the county. Every person he approached, every bribe he offered, every illegal scheme he proposed, we documented all of it. Your boyfriend just helped us complete the largest anti-corruption operation in the state's history. Lindsay looked up at Boyd with an expression of complete devastation. You knew everything. I knew you were cheating on me 3 months ago, Boyd said. I knew about Travis's real identity 6 weeks ago. I knew about your plan to have me arrested 2 weeks ago. What I didn't know was how far you were willing to go to destroy me. Now I do. Police Chief Santos motioned to 2 officers. Mrs. Hutchinson, you're under arrest for conspiracy, filing false reports, and theft of government documents. You have the right to remain silent. As the handcuffs clicked around Lindsay's wrists, she looked at Boyd with something approaching desperation. Boyd, please. We were married for 12 years. That has to count for something. Boyd's expression didn't change. Those 12 years were apparently a lie. You said so yourself. I was just convenient. Stable income, nice house, and dumb enough to trust you completely. As Lindsay was led away, Mayor Garrett placed a hand on Boyd's shoulder. I'm sorry you had to go through this. Boyd shook his head. Don't be. This was necessary. Lindsay and Travis weren't just attacking me. They were attacking everything my family has built. They were threatening the stability of the entire county. They had to be stopped. What happens now? Boyd looked around the police station, noting how differently everyone was treating him now that his true position was public knowledge. Now we clean up the mess. Travis gets handed over to federal authorities. Lindsay goes to prison. And anyone else who might be thinking about betraying the Hutchinsons gets a very clear message about the consequences. And your marriage? Boyd's laugh was cold. My marriage ended the moment Lindsay decided to betray me. She'll discover that divorce from prison is considerably more complicated than divorce from freedom. As Boyd left the police station, he realized that the most difficult part of his plan was still ahead. Lindsay and Travis were neutralized, but there were others involved in their scheme, people who had helped them, people who had known about the plan and done nothing to stop it. Boyd Hutchinson was about to show all of them why his family had survived and thrived for 3 generations while others had fallen. The lesson would be thorough, permanent, and absolutely merciless. Chapter 5. The Network Unravels. The next morning, Boyd Hutchinson sat in his study at 6 a.m., surrounded by files that detailed every aspect of Lindsay and Travis's conspiracy. What he'd discovered in the 12 hours since their arrest was far more extensive than he'd initially realized. Their plan hadn't just involved destroying his reputation. It had been designed to trigger a complete restructuring of power in Cedar Falls. Boyd's phone rang. Tony Marcelli's gravelly voice filled the room. We got a problem, Boyd. Bigger than we thought. How much bigger? Your wife and her boyfriend weren't working alone. We've identified at least 8 other people involved in this scheme, including 3 city council members, a federal agent, and someone inside the state attorney general's office. Boyd felt his jaw tighten. Names. Council members Patricia Wells, David Reed, and Michael Torres. The federal agent is Special Agent Sarah Chun. She's been feeding information to Travis for months. The state contact is Assistant Attorney General Robert Kim. But here's the kicker. They've got financial backing from Consolidated Development Corporation. Boyd knew CDC, a massive real estate conglomerate that had been trying to establish a foothold in Cedar Falls for years. They've been blocked repeatedly by zoning restrictions and municipal contracts that favored local businesses. Now he understood why Travis had seemed so confident and well-funded. So this wasn't just about destroying my marriage, Boyd said. This was about destroying the entire local power structure. Exactly. CDC wanted to clear the way for major development projects. They figured if they could take you down and install their people in key positions, they could reshape the entire county. Your wife was just the entry point. Boyd stood up and walked to his window, looking out at the town his family had protected for 3 generations. The idea that outsiders had come so close to destroying everything his grandfather and father had built filled him with a cold rage that was unlike anything he'd ever experienced. Tony, I want a complete dossier on every person involved within 24 hours. Financial records, communications, personal connections, weaknesses, everything. Already started. Mickey's handling the financial traces, Frank's got people working on the communication records, and Detective Kowalski is providing access to official files. We'll have everything by tomorrow morning. Boyd hung up and immediately dialed another number. District Attorney Patricia Hendricks answered on the first ring. Boyd, I was hoping you'd call. We've got some complications, such as Travis Morrison is demanding a lawyer, and he's hinting that he has information about federal crimes that could bring down multiple government officials. He wants immunity in exchange for testimony. Boyd smiled grimly. Let him think he's getting immunity. I want to know everything he's willing to reveal before we decide his fate. There's something else. I got a call from a state attorney general's office. They're sending investigators to review the charges against your wife. Apparently, there are questions about the legality of the surveillance evidence. Who specifically is raising these questions? Assistant Attorney General Robert Kim. Boyd felt a surge of satisfaction. The network was revealing itself exactly as he'd hoped. Patricia, I need you to stall any state investigation for 72 hours. Tell them you're still processing federal evidence. I can do that, but Boyd, if Kim is dirty, this could go all the way to the governor's office. Let me worry about the governor. Just by me, 3 days. Boyd's next call was to Mayor Garrett. Bill, we need to talk. My office, 1 hour. How bad is it? Worse than we thought, but not worse than we can handle. Bring Chief Santos and anyone else you trust completely. An hour later, Boyd's study was filled with the most powerful, legitimate officials in Cedar Falls. Mayor Garrett, Police Chief Santos, District Attorney Hendricks, and Judge Margaret Flynn, Boyd's father's goddaughter and one of the most respected jurists in the state. Boyd spread the preliminary files across his desk. Ladies and gentlemen, Lindsay and Travis were part of a conspiracy involving at least 8 other people and financed by Consolidated Development Corporation. The plan was to destroy me, install their people in key municipal positions, and reshape the entire county for their benefit. Judge Flynn examined the documents. This is extensive. How long have they been planning this? At least 18 months. CDC has been studying our municipal structure, identifying key relationships, and mapping out exactly how to disrupt our local control systems. They chose Lindsay as their entry point because she had access to my network and my information. Police Chief Santos looked grim. 3 of our city council members are involved. If this gets out before we can handle it properly, it could trigger a complete collapse of municipal government, which is exactly what CDC wants, Boyd said. Chaos creates opportunities for outside intervention. If they can destabilize our local government, they can justify bringing in state and federal oversight. Once that happens, they can manipulate the rebuilding process to their advantage. Mayor Garrett studied a financial report. Boyd, these numbers show that CDC has been planning to invest over $200 million in Cedar Falls development projects. They're not just trying to get a foothold. They're planning to completely transform the county. Boyd nodded. Which means we need to move quickly and decisively. We can't just arrest the local conspirators and hope the problem goes away. We need to destroy CDC's entire operation and send a message that will prevent anyone else from trying something similar. District Attorney Hendricks looked concerned. Boyd, we're talking about taking on a corporation with billions in assets and connections throughout the federal government. Are you sure we have the resources for this kind of fight? Boyd's smile was predatory. Patricia, my family has been accumulating favors, connections, and resources for 70 years. CDC made the mistake of attacking us on our home ground, using people who owe us their careers. This isn't going to be a fair fight. It's going to be a massacre. Judge Flynn leaned forward. What do you need from us? I need arrest warrants for the 3 dirty council members, sealed until I give the word. I need surveillance authorization for CDC's operations throughout the state. And I need a federal prosecutor who's completely clean and completely loyal. I can provide the warrants and surveillance authorization, Flynn said. For the federal prosecutor, you'll need to go higher. Boyd pulled out his phone and dialed a number that few people in Cedar Falls even knew existed. The call was answered immediately. Governor's office, this is Helen. Helen, this is Boyd Hutchinson. I need to speak with the governor immediately. Tell him it's about the CDC situation. There was a brief pause. Hold, please, Mr. Hutchinson. Governor James Morrison, no relation to Travis, came on the line within 30 seconds. Boyd, I've been expecting your call. How bad is the infiltration? State level, including someone in the Attorney General's office. We're dealing with a coordinated attack on municipal government funded by outside interests. I need clean federal resources. You'll have them. I'm assigning Special Prosecutor Amanda Walsh to your case. She reports directly to me, and she has authority to override anyone in the Attorney General's office. How long do you need? 72 hours to complete the local arrests. Another week to dismantle CDC's entire operation. Done. Boyd, when this is over, we're going to need to have a conversation about formalizing your family's role in state government. I understand, Governor. As Boyd hung up, he looked around the room at the faces of people who had just realized they were witnessing the emergence of a power structure that had existed in the shadows for decades. Ladies and gentlemen, Boyd said, for 3 generations, my family has protected this county from exactly this kind of outside interference. We've done it quietly, carefully, and always within the bounds of the law. But CDC and their local conspirators have forced us into the open. What happens next will determine whether Cedar Falls remains an independent community or becomes another corporate conquest. Mayor Garrett cleared his throat. What do you need us to do? Boyd's expression was granite hard. Tomorrow morning, we begin the systematic destruction of everyone who betrayed this community. We start with the 3 council members, move on to the federal agent, and finish with CDC itself. By the time we're done, no one will ever again mistake Cedar Falls for an easy target. As the meeting broke up, Boyd remained in his study, staring at the photos of his grandfather and father on the wall. They had built an empire of influence through patience, intelligence, and ruthless efficiency. Now, it was Boyd's turn to prove that the Hutchinson legacy would endure for another generation. Lindsay and Travis had thought they were destroying one man's life. Instead, they had awakened something far more dangerous, a family that had been waiting 70 years for someone to give them a reason to show their true power. The reckoning was about to begin. Chapter 6, The Reckoning Begins. By dawn on Friday, Boyd Hutchinson had positioned his pieces like a chess grandmaster preparing for checkmate. The next 24 hours would determine whether his family's 70-year reign over Cedar Falls would continue or whether outside forces would successfully destroy everything his grandfather had built. At 6 a.m., Boyd met with Tony Marcelli in an abandoned warehouse on the outskirts of town. The building had been used for sensitive discussions by the Hutchinson family for decades, and its soundproofed rooms and untraceable phone lines made it ideal for coordinating complex operations. Tell me everything, Boyd said as he settled into a chair that had been positioned to face a wall covered with photographs, documents, and connection diagrams. Tony consulted a thick folder. Councilmember Patricia Wells has been taking CDC money for 8 months. They've got her on recorded phone calls discussing how to manipulate zoning laws to favor their projects. David Reed owes them $300,000 in gambling debts. They own him completely. Michael Torres is sleeping with a CDC executive, and they've got video evidence. Boyd studied the photographs of the 3 council members. He'd known all of them for years, had attended their children's graduations, their anniversary parties, their campaign events. The betrayal was personal as well as political. What about the federal agent? Special Agent Sarah Chun has been feeding information to Travis for 6 months. She's been using her FBI credentials to access classified municipal records and sharing them with CDC. But here's the interesting part. She doesn't know about CDC's involvement. She thinks she's working directly for Travis. So she's expendable to them. Completely. Which gives us leverage. Boyd moved to the communications records. Show me the CDC connection. Tony spread out a series of financial documents. Consolidated Development Corporation established a subsidiary called Mountain View Properties specifically to handle the Cedar Falls operation. They've invested $12 million so far, with plans to invest another $100 million once they gain municipal control. Personnel. The operation is being run by CDC Vice President Jennifer Walsh. Boyd looked up sharply. Walsh, any relation to the special prosecutor the governor assigned? Boyd was already reaching for his phone. We're about to find out. Amanda Walsh answered on the first ring. This is Special Prosecutor Walsh. Ms. Walsh, this is Boyd Hutchinson. I need to ask you a direct question, and I need a direct answer. Do you have any family members working for Consolidated Development Corporation? There was a long pause. Why would you ask that? Because CDC is running the conspiracy we're investigating, and their operation is being managed by someone named Jennifer Walsh. Another pause, longer this time. Jennifer Walsh is my sister, but I haven't spoken to her in 5 years, and I didn't know she was involved in this case. Boyd felt a surge of adrenaline. This was either an incredible coincidence or the most sophisticated trap he'd ever encountered. Ms. Walsh, I'm going to need you to make a choice. Either you recuse yourself from this case immediately, or you help me destroy your sister's operation completely. Mr. Hutchinson, I took an oath to uphold the law regardless of personal relationships. If my sister is involved in federal crimes, she'll face the consequences. Boyd smiled grimly. Amanda Walsh had just passed the most important test of her career. Good, because we're about to give you evidence that will send her to prison for 20 years. At 8 a.m., the first arrest began. Councilmember Patricia Wells was taken into custody at her home as she prepared to leave for work. David Reed was arrested at his office. Michael Torres was picked up at the golf course. All 3 were charged with conspiracy, bribery, and corruption of public officials. By 9 a.m., news of the arrest had spread throughout Cedar Falls. The local media was in chaos. The remaining council members were in emergency session, and every city employee was wondering if they were next. Boyd watched the developing chaos from his office while fielding calls from concerned business leaders, worried citizens, and reporters from regional news outlets. He gave the same carefully crafted response to each caller. The county is experiencing some personnel changes, but municipal services will continue without interruption. At 10 a.m., Special Agent Sarah Chun was arrested by federal marshals at the FBI field office in the state capitol. The charges included abuse of federal authority, conspiracy to commit fraud, and violation of the Espionage Act. Her arrest sent shockwaves through the federal law enforcement community. Boyd's phone rang at 10:30. It was Travis Morrison, calling from the county jail. "You son of a bitch," Travis said without preamble. "You've destroyed everything." "Not everything," Boyd replied calmly. "Not yet. I want to make a deal. I'll give you information about CDC's other operations throughout the state in exchange for immunity." Boyd laughed. "Travis, you're not in a position to negotiate. You're going to federal prison for 20 years minimum. The only question is whether your cell has a window. You don't understand. CDC has operations in 12 states. They've been systematically corrupting municipal governments for 5 years. The Cedar Falls operation was just a pilot program. This was new information, and Boyd felt his interest sharpen. "Keep talking." They have a list of 30 target communities, all similar to Cedar Falls. Small enough to control, wealthy enough to be worth the effort, and isolated enough that outside interference is unlikely. They've already begun operations in 6 other locations. Boyd considered this. if CDC was operating a nationwide conspiracy to corrupt municipal governments, then the Cedar Falls operation was far more significant than he'd realized. Destroying it completely could protect not just his community, but dozens of others. Travis, you're going to tell Special Prosecutor Walsh everything you know about CDC's operations. Every name, every location, every scheme. In exchange, I'll make sure you're housed in a federal facility rather than a state prison. You'll still serve 20 years, but you'll live to tell your story. And if I don't cooperate, Boyd's voice dropped to a whisper, then you'll discover what happens to people who threaten my family. Travis, you tried to destroy everything my grandfather and father built. You used my wife to attack my life's work. You brought criminals and corruption into my community. Do you really think I'm going to let you walk away from this? It was a long silence. I'll talk to the prosecutor. Smart choice. At noon, Boyd met with Mayor Garrett, Police Chief Santos, and the remaining city council members in the municipal building's emergency conference room. The mood was tense, with everyone trying to understand how 3 of their colleagues had been corrupted without anyone realizing it. Ladies and gentlemen, Boyd said, what happened here was not an accident. Cedar Falls was targeted by Consolidated Development Corporation because we represent something they want to control, a stable, prosperous community with strong local government and minimal outside interference. Council member Janet Morrison, an elderly woman who had served the community for 20 years, looked shaken. Boyd, how do we not see this coming? Because they were very good at what they do, Boyd replied. CDC has spent years studying communities like ours, identifying weaknesses and developing strategies to exploit them. They chose their targets carefully and moved slowly to avoid detection. What happens now? Asked Councilmember Robert Hayes. Boyd stood and walked to the window, looking out at the town square where his grandfather had once operated a small construction office and his father had expanded the family's influence throughout the region. Now we show CDC and anyone else who might be watching that Cedar Falls is not available for conquest. We expose their entire operation, prosecute everyone involved, and make it clear that attacking this community will result in consequences far beyond anything they can imagine. Mayor Garrett leaned forward. Boyd, the state media is starting to pick up this story. By tonight, we're going to have reporters from major outlets asking questions about corruption in municipal government. How do we handle that? Boyd turned back to the group with a smile that was both confident and slightly predatory. We tell him the truth. Cedar Falls identified and eliminated a conspiracy to corrupt our government. We did it quickly, efficiently, and completely. And we did it without any outside assistance because we protect our own. As the meeting broke up, Boyd remained behind with Mayor Garrett. Bill, there's something else you need to know. This operation extends far beyond Cedar Falls. CDC has been targeting municipalities throughout the region, and we may be the only community that successfully fought back. What does that mean for us? Boyd's expression was granite hard. It means that what we do in the next 48 hours will determine whether dozens of other communities fall victim to CDC's schemes. We're not just fighting for Cedar Falls anymore. We're fighting for the principle that local communities can't be bought and sold by corporate interests. And if we lose, Boyd's smile was cold. We won't lose. My family has been protecting this community for 70 years, and we're not going to stop now. CDC made the mistake of attacking us directly. Now they're going to learn why that was the worst decision they ever made. As Boyd left the municipal building, he realized that the next phase of his plan would require him to abandon any pretense of operating within normal legal and business channels. CDC had declared war on his family and his community. It was time to show them what a real war looked like. Chapter 7, The Empire Strikes Back. At 3 a.m. on Saturday morning, Boyd Hutchinson stood in the command center he'd established in the warehouse, surrounded by monitors displaying financial data, communication intercepts, and surveillance footage from 12 states. What had begun as a simple matter of dealing with his cheating wife had evolved into the largest anti-corruption operation in regional history. Special Prosecutor Amanda Walsh had arrived from the state capitol at midnight, bringing with her a team of federal investigators and enough evidence to to prosecute CDC executives in multiple jurisdictions. Her decision to pursue her sister's prosecution with ruthless efficiency had impressed Boyd and convinced him that she could be trusted completely. Mr. Hutchinson, Amanda said, pointing to a financial chart, CDC's operation is more extensive than we initially realized. They've invested over $50 million in municipal corruption schemes across 6 states. The Cedar Falls operation was actually one of their smaller investments. Boyd studied the data. Show me their biggest operation. Amanda pulled up files on a town called Millbrook Heights in Colorado. Population 40,000, similar economic profile to Cedar Falls. CDC began their operation there 18 months ago. They've corrupted the mayor, half the city council, and the police chief. They're currently in the process of seizing control of municipal water rights, which they plan to sell to agricultural interests for $200 million. Status of local resistance? Non-existent. The few officials who tried to oppose them were either bought off or destroyed through manufactured scandals. Millbrook Heights is now completely under CDC control. Boyd felt his jaw tighten. How many other communities are in similar situations? For that we know of. 2 in Montana, 1 in Wyoming, and 1 in Nevada. In each case, CDC spent months identifying key municipal officials, then systematically corrupted or eliminated them. The pattern is identical to what they attempted here. Tony Marcelli looked up from a communications console. Boyd, we've got a problem. CDC just activated what appears to be a crisis response protocol. They're moving money out of the country, destroying records, and evacuating key personnel. How do you know? Jennifer Walsh, the special prosecutor's sister, just boarded a private jet to the Cayman Islands. 3 other CDC executives are en route to Switzerland. They're shutting down the entire operation. Boyd felt a surge of cold anger. CDC was attempting to escape justice by abandoning their schemes and fleeing the country with their profits. The communities they corrupted would be left in chaos, while the executives responsible lived in luxury abroad. Amanda, Boyd said, how quickly can you freeze CDC's assets? I can get federal asset seizure orders within 6 hours, but only for funds currently in U.S. banks. If they're moving money offshore, we'll need international cooperation, which could take months. Boyd walked to his communication station and began making calls. The first was to Governor Morrison. Governor, CDC is attempting to flee the country with the proceeds of their corruption schemes. I need immediate federal intervention to freeze all assets and prevent further transfers. Boyd, I can get you emergency asset seizure orders, but I'll need probable cause documentation for federal crimes. You'll have it within an hour. But Governor, there's something else. CDC has successfully corrupted municipal governments in at least 4 other states. This operation needs to expand beyond regional jurisdiction. There was a pause. Are you asking me to contact other governors? I'm asking you to coordinate a multi-state response that will destroy CDC completely and protect every community they've targeted. This can't be handled as separate local investigations. We need a coordinated national operation. Boyd, you're talking about one of the largest corporate prosecutions in recent history. Are you certain you have the evidence to support something this extensive? Boyd looked around the command center at the mountains of evidence his team had compiled. Governor, when we're done, CDC will be nothing but a memory, and every executive involved will spend the rest of their lives in federal prison. 2 hours later, Boyd's operation had expanded to include law enforcement agencies from 6 states, federal prosecutors from 3 regional offices, and asset seizure teams from the Treasury Department. The scale of the response was unprecedented for a municipal corruption case. But Boyd wasn't finished. CDC had made the mistake of attacking his family and his community, and he was determined to ensure that no trace of their organization survived. At 8 a.m., Boyd received a call from Mickey Torino. We've got movement on the CDC executives who are still in the country. Jennifer Walsh's jet was forced to land in Miami. Federal marshals are waiting for her. 2 other executives were arrested at JFK, trying to board flights to Europe. What about their domestic operations? We've identified CDC field offices in 12 cities. Federal teams are moving to seize records and arrest personnel simultaneously. The entire network is being rolled up. Boyd felt a grim satisfaction. CDC had spent years building their corruption network, and he was destroying it in a matter of hours. But the most important call came at 10 a.m. from Amanda Walsh. "Mr. Hutchinson, we've recovered CDC's complete operational files. They had detailed plans for corrupting municipal governments in over 30 communities nationwide. The scope of this conspiracy is far beyond anything we initially imagined." How far beyond? They were planning to control municipal government in every economically attractive small city west of the Mississippi River. Water rights, zoning authority, tax policy, municipal contracts. They wanted to control it all. The ultimate goal was to create a network of corporate-controlled municipalities that could be manipulated for massive profit. Boyd stared out the window at Cedar Falls, thinking about his grandfather's determination to protect the community from outside control, his father's expansion of that protection throughout the region, and his own commitment to preserving local independence. "Amanda, how many communities did we just save? Dozens, maybe hundreds. If CDC had succeeded here, they would have had the model and resources to expand nationwide. Your successful resistance broke their entire strategy." At noon, Boyd gathered his core team in the warehouse for a final briefing. The arrests were complete, the assets were frozen, and CDC's entire operation had been dismantled. But there was still one piece of unfinished business. "Lindsay and Travis," Boyd said. "They're the ones who brought this plague to our community. Their sentencing hearing is scheduled for next week." District Attorney Patricia Hendricks consulted her files. Travis is looking at 25 years federal time. Lindsay could get 15 years, but her lawyer is arguing for reduced sentencing based on her cooperation. Boyd's expression was stone cold. She didn't cooperate. She was caught, and she would have destroyed not just me, but everything my family has protected for 3 generations. "Boyd," Amanda Walsh said carefully, "Lindsay is your wife. The court will expect some consideration of your wishes regarding her sentencing." Boyd's smile was razor sharp. "The court will get my wishes. I want both of them to serve maximum sentences in federal facilities with no possibility of parole. I want them to understand that betraying the Hutchinson family carries consequences that last a lifetime." Tony Marcelli looked uncomfortable. "Boyd, are you sure? 15 years is a long time for someone who was essentially manipulated by outside forces." Boyd turned to face his oldest friend and most trusted ally. "Tony, Lindsay wasn't manipulated. She made calculated decisions to betray me, to steal classified information, and to help destroy our community. She did it for money, for excitement, and because she thought I was weak enough to forgive her." Boyd walked to the wall where photographs of his grandfather and father hung alongside images of Cedar Falls from different eras. "My grandfather taught me that loyalty is the foundation of everything we've built. My father taught me that betrayal, once forgiven, invites more betrayal. Lindsay and Travis will serve their full sentences, and everyone in this region will understand that attacking the Hutchinson family is a mistake you make only once." As Boyd left the warehouse, he felt a profound sense of completion. CDC was destroyed, their executives were in custody, and dozens of communities would remain free from corporate control. Lindsay and Travis would spend the next 20 years in federal prison, thinking about their decision to betray the most powerful family in the region. But more importantly, Boyd had proved that the Hutchinson legacy would continue for another generation. His grandfather's empire of influence had not only survived its greatest challenge, it had emerged stronger, more visible, and more respected than ever. The war was over. Boyd Hutchinson had won completely. Chapter 8. Justice Served. The federal courthouse in Cedar Falls had never hosted a sentencing hearing that drew so much attention. Representatives from 6 state governments, federal prosecutors from multiple jurisdictions, and media outlets from across the region had gathered to witness the conclusion of what legal experts were already calling the largest municipal corruption case in modern history. Boyd Hutchinson sat in the front row of the courtroom, wearing the same dark suit he'd worn to his father's funeral 5 years earlier. His expression was composed, professional, and completely unforgiving. Beside him sat Mayor Garrett, District Attorney Hendricks, and Special Prosecutor Amanda Walsh, who had become the face of the multi-state investigation that had destroyed CDC completely. Lindsay sat at the defendant's table with her court-appointed attorney, a young public defender who had drawn the impossible task of arguing for leniency in a case that had captured national attention. She looked smaller than Boyd remembered, her honey-colored hair now dull and unkempt, her face gaunt from months of stress and poor jail food. She had not once looked in Boyd's direction since entering the courtroom. Travis Morrison sat at a separate table with his attorney, expensive defense lawyer from Chicago who had flown in specifically for this case. Travis appeared defiant, his jaw set and his eyes fixed on some point above the judge's head. He had refused to accept responsibility for his actions and continued to claim that he had been manipulated by CDC executives who were now beyond his reach. Judge Margaret Flynn entered the courtroom at precisely 2 p.m., her expression grave and her demeanor reflecting the historical significance of the proceedings. Flynn had been handling high-profile cases for 20 years, but this was the first time she had presided over a sentencing that would determine the fate of a conspiracy spanning multiple states. Ladies and gentlemen, Judge Flynn began, we are here to conclude the sentencing phase of United States versus Morrison and United States versus Hutchinson. The defendants have been convicted of conspiracy to commit fraud, corruption of public officials, theft of classified documents, and multiple other federal crimes. Before I announce their sentences, I want to address the broader significance of this case. Flynn paused, looking around the packed courtroom. What happened in Cedar Falls represents an attack on the fundamental principle of local self-governance. The defendants, working with Consolidated Development Corporation, attempted to corrupt and control municipal government for private profit. They were stopped not by federal oversight or state intervention, but by the vigilance and determination of local citizens who refused to allow their community to be bought and sold. Boyd felt a surge of pride as Flynn continued her remarks. The judge was making it clear that the successful resistance to CDC's scheme was a victory for communities everywhere. Mr. Morrison, Flynn said, addressing Travis directly, you came to Cedar Falls as a predator, seeking to exploit the trust and stability of a close-knit community. You used deception, manipulation, and corruption to advance your goals. You showed no respect for the people you were harming and no remorse for the damage you were causing. Travis finally looked up, meeting the judge's gaze with something approaching defiance. The court sentences you to 25 years in federal prison without possibility of parole. You will serve your sentence at ADX Florence, where your ability to harm other communities will be permanently eliminated. A murmur ran through the courtroom. ADX Florence was the highest security federal facility in the country, reserved for the most dangerous criminals. Sending Travis, there was Judge Flynn's way of ensuring that he would never again be able to participate in any form of organized criminal activity. Mrs. Hutchinson, Flynn said, turning to Lindsay, who finally looked up with tears streaming down her face. Your case presents particular challenges for this court. You were married to one of the most respected citizens in this region, a man whose family has contributed to the stability and prosperity of this community for 3 generations. Boyd watched his wife's face as Judge Flynn continued. You had access to classified information, financial resources, and social connections that most people could only dream of. Instead of honoring the trust placed in you, you chose to use those advantages to attack the very community that had embraced you. Lindsay was sobbing now, her shoulders shaking as she tried to maintain some semblance of composure. Your betrayal was not the result of desperation or manipulation. It was the result of greed, selfishness, and a complete disregard for the vows you made and the trust you accepted. The court has reviewed the evidence extensively, including recordings of your own words describing your husband as dumb enough to trust completely and your marriage as merely convenient. Boyd felt no sympathy as he watched Lindsay realize that her own recorded statements were being used to justify her sentence. Mrs. Hutchinson, the court sentences you to 20 years in federal prison without possibility of parole. You will serve your sentence at FCI Dublin, where you will have ample time to consider the consequences of betraying the people who loved and trusted you. The courtroom erupted in whispers and movement as reporters rushed to file their stories and court officials moved to process the defendants. 20 years was significantly more than Lindsay's attorney had anticipated, and the decision to deny parole meant that she would remain in federal prison until she was nearly 60 years old. As the defendants were led away in handcuffs, Lindsay turned for one final look at Boyd. Her expression was a mixture of desperation, regret, and something that might have been an appeal for forgiveness. Boyd's expression didn't change. He watched his wife disappear through the courthouse doors with the same cold indifference he might show to any other criminal being led to prison. After the courtroom cleared, Boyd found himself standing alone with Judge Flynn in the hallway outside the courtroom. "Boyd," she said quietly, "I hope you find some peace in this outcome." "Justice isn't about peace," Boyd replied. "It's about consequences. Lindsay and Travis chose to betray everything I've spent my life building. Now they'll live with the consequences of that choice for the next 20 years. And CDC?" Boyd's smile was grim, completely destroyed. 53 executives arrested across 6 states, all assets seized, and every municipal operation shut down. They'll never threaten another community. Judge Flynn nodded approvingly. "Your grandfather would be proud. So would your father." As Boyd left the courthouse, he was approached by a cluster of reporters seeking comments on the sentencing. He paused on the courthouse steps, looking out at the town square where his grandfather had first established the family's presence in Cedar Falls. "Ladies and gentlemen," Boyd said, "today's sentencing sends a clear message that communities like Cedar Falls cannot be bought, sold, or corrupted by outside interests. My family has protected this region for 3 generations, and we will continue to do so for 3 more. Mr. Hutchinson," called a reporter from the state capitol, "do you have any message for your wife?" Boyd's expression was stone cold. Lindsay Hutchinson made her choices. Now she'll live with the consequences. "I have no wife." As Boyd walked away from the courthouse, he felt the weight of his family's history settling on his shoulders. His grandfather had built an empire through determination and ruthless efficiency. His father had expanded that empire while maintaining its core principles. Now Boyd had proved that the empire would survive and prosper into the next generation. Lindsay and Travis were finished. CDC was destroyed, and every person in the region who might be considering betraying the Hutchinson family had just received a very clear message about the consequences of such betrayal. The war was over. Boyd Hutchinson had won completely, permanently, and without mercy. Chapter 9. The New Order. 6 months after the sentencing, Boyd Hutchinson stood in his study, reviewing reports from across the region that documented the complete transformation of Cedar Falls and its surrounding communities. The destruction of CDC and the prosecution of their local conspirators had created a power vacuum that Boyd had systematically filled with loyal allies and carefully chosen successors. The 3 corrupted city council members had been replaced through special elections with candidates personally selected by Boyd. The new mayor, Patricia Santos, Chief Santos's sister and a longtime family friend, had proven remarkably effective at implementing Boyd's vision for municipal development. The entire municipal government was now staffed by people who understood that their positions existed at Boyd's discretion. More importantly, Boyd's role as the unofficial power broker for the region was no longer hidden. Governor Morrison had formally appointed him as special advisor for municipal affairs, a position that gave him official authority to coordinate anti-corruption efforts throughout the state. Federal authorities had designated him as a permanent consultant for investigations involving municipal conspiracy, which effectively made him untouchable by outside interference. But the most satisfying development was the fate of the communities CDC had targeted. Millbrook Heights, Colorado, had been liberated from corporate control after Boyd provided federal authorities with evidence of CDC's operations there. The corrupted officials were arrested, CDC's assets were seized, and the community's water rights were restored to municipal control. Similar operations had freed 4 other communities from CDC's influence. Boyd's phone rang. interrupting his review of the monthly reports. Tony Marcelli's voice filled the room. "Boyd, we've got a situation. Someone's been asking questions about the family business. Looks like we might have a new problem." Boyd felt his interest sharpen. "What kind of questions?" "A private investigator from Chicago has been nosing around, asking about your connections, your family's history, and specifically about what happened to Lindsay and Travis. He's representing someone who wants to remain anonymous." Boyd smiled grimly. "Any theories about who might be paying for this investigation?" "Could be CDC's insurance company looking for grounds to avoid paying claims. Could be federal prosecutors from outside our region trying to build a case. Or it could be someone connected to Lindsay or Travis who thinks they can find grounds for an appeal." Boyd considered the possibilities. After his complete victory over CDC, it was inevitable that someone would eventually challenge his family's control. The question was whether this new threat was serious enough to require immediate action. "Tony, I want complete background information on this investigator within 24 hours. Financial records, client history, personal connections. If someone thinks they can threaten what we've built, they need to understand the consequences." "Already on it. Mickey's handling the financial traces, and Frank's got people looking into his personal life. We'll know everything about him by tomorrow morning." Boyd hung up and walked to the window overlooking the town square. Cedar Falls had never been more prosperous or more stable. Municipal contracts were being awarded to local businesses, tax revenue was up 30%, and unemployment was at historic lows. The removal of outside interference had allowed the community to thrive in ways that would have been impossible under CDC's control. But prosperity and stability came at a price that few people in Cedar Falls fully understood. Boyd's control over the community was absolute and unforgiving. Local businesses succeeded or failed based on their loyalty to the Hutchinson family. Political careers were made or destroyed by Boyd's approval. Even social relationships were influenced by proximity to the family's power structure. Boyd's reflection was interrupted by a knock on his study door. "Come in." Mayor Patricia Santos entered, carrying a folder that Boyd recognized as containing updates on ongoing municipal projects. "Boyd, I wanted to discuss the Henderson development proposal and the new water treatment facility funding." As Patricia briefed him on municipal affairs, Boyd reflected on how completely his life had changed since Lindsay's betrayal. 6 months ago, he had been a successful businessman with hidden influence. Now he was the acknowledged ruler of an entire region, with official government recognition and virtually unlimited authority. The transformation had come at a personal cost that Boyd was only beginning to understand. He lived alone in the house he had shared with Lindsay, surrounded by reminders of a marriage that had been built on lies. He had no close personal relationships outside of his business associates, and no prospect of ever again trusting someone enough to share his life. But Boyd felt no regret about the choices he had made. Lindsay's betrayal had revealed weaknesses in his approach to power that could have eventually destroyed everything his family had built. By responding with overwhelming force and absolute ruthlessness, he had eliminated those weaknesses permanently. At 8 p.m., Boyd received an unexpected visitor. Detective Ray Kowalski, now promoted to chief of detectives, arrived at the house carrying information about the private investigator. "Boyd, we've identified the Chicago investigator. His name is David Chun, and he's not working for CDC's insurance company or any federal prosecutors. He's working for Lindsay." Boyd felt his jaw tighten. "Explain." "Lindsay's been working with a group of federal inmates to appeal her conviction. They're claiming that the evidence against her was obtained illegally and that she was denied effective counsel. This investigator is trying to find grounds for overturning her sentence." Boyd laughed, a sound completely devoid of humor. "Lindsay thinks she can escape justice by challenging the investigation that exposed her crimes. It gets worse. She's also been in contact with journalists who are interested in writing a book about the case. They're planning to portray her as a victim of an overzealous prosecution and you as a corrupt local power broker who manipulated the legal system for personal revenge." Boyd felt a surge of cold anger that was unlike anything he had experienced since Lindsay's original betrayal. His ex-wife was attempting to destroy his reputation and undermine everything he had accomplished, even for federal prison. Ray, I want you to arrange a meeting with Lindsay. I'm going to visit her in federal prison and explain exactly what will happen if she continues this campaign. Boyd, that might not be wise. Any contact between you and Lindsay could be used to support her claims about prosecutorial misconduct. Boyd's smile was predatory. Let her try. I'm a special advisor to the governor and a federal consultant. My conversations with federal prisoners are protected by official privilege. 2 days later, Boyd sat across from Lindsay in the visiting room at FCI Dublin, separated by reinforced glass and speaking through monitored telephone lines. Lindsay looked older, thinner, and harder than he remembered, but her eyes still held the same calculating intelligence that had once attracted him. "Hello, Boyd," she said, her voice steady despite the circumstances. "Lindsay, I understand you've been busy. I've been fighting for my freedom, something you made sure I'd have to do from prison." Boyd leaned forward, his expression stone cold. "Let me explain something to you. The investigation that put you here was completely legal and thoroughly documented. Your conviction was based on evidence that you provided yourself through your own recorded statements. Any attempt to overturn that conviction will fail. We'll see about that." "No, Lindsay, we won't see about that. Because if you continue this campaign, I will destroy not just you, but everyone associated with your appeals process. Your lawyers will lose their licenses, your journalist friends will find themselves unable to get their stories published, and your fellow inmates will discover that challenging the Hutchinson family carries consequences even inside federal prison." Lindsay's face went pale. "You can't threaten me. This conversation is being recorded." Boyd's smile was razor sharp. "I'm not threatening you, Lindsay. I'm explaining the natural consequences of your choices. You tried to destroy me once and failed. If you try again, the results will be far worse than 20 years in federal prison." "What are you saying?" Boyd stood up, preparing to leave. "I'm saying that you have one chance to accept your sentence and serve your time quietly. If you continue to challenge your conviction or attempt to damage my reputation, you'll discover that federal prison is not the worst thing that can happen to someone who betrays the Hutchinson family." As Boyd walked away, he heard Lindsay shouting into the phone, but he didn't turn around. He had delivered his message clearly and completely. If Lindsay was smart, she would abandon her appeals and accept the consequences of her betrayal. If she wasn't smart, she would learn why challenging his family was a mistake that people made only once. 3 weeks later, Tony Marcelli called with news that confirmed Boyd's assessment of the situation. Lindsay's withdrawn all her appeals and fired her lawyers. The private investigator has returned to Chicago, and the journalists have dropped their book project. Boyd felt a grim satisfaction. She finally understood. "Looks like it. There's something else, though. I've been getting calls from other communities asking for our help with similar problems. Apparently, word has spread about how we handled the CDC situation." Boyd considered this development. His family had always focused on protecting Cedar Falls and the immediate region, but their successful resistance to corporate corruption had attracted attention from communities throughout the state and beyond. How many communities? 7 so far from 3 different states. They're all dealing with outside interference, corporate corruption, federal overreach, or criminal organizations trying to establish control. They want to hire us as consultants. Boyd smiled. His grandfather had built a local empire. His father had expanded it regionally. Now Boyd had the opportunity to create something unprecedented, a network of protected communities that could resist any form of outside control. Set up meetings with representatives from each community. If they're serious about protecting their independence, we'll help them. But they need to understand that working with the Hutchinson family means accepting our methods and our authority. As Boyd hung up the phone, he realized that Lindsay's betrayal had ultimately led to the greatest expansion of his family's influence in 3 generations. What had begun as a simple matter of dealing with a cheating wife had evolved into the foundation of a new order that could protect dozens of communities from outside interference. Boyd Hutchinson had not just survived his wife's betrayal. He had used it to transform himself from a regional power broker into something approaching a shadow government for independent communities throughout the American West. The Hutchinson legacy would continue not just for another generation, but potentially for centuries to come. and it would be built on the absolute principle that betrayal, once attempted, would be met with swift, complete, and merciless consequences. Lindsay and Travis had thought they were destroying one man's life. Instead, they had awakened an empire that would reshape the balance of power throughout the region for decades to come. Boyd Hutchinson had won completely, permanently, and beyond anything his grandfather could have imagined. And there you have it. Another story comes to an end. What did you think? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoy this story, consider joining our community by subscribing. It means the world to us. For more stories like this one, check out the recommended videos on screen, and I'll see you there.